Cool. All right, everybody. I guess with the departure of our beloved chair, it has fallen to me to lead this today. So I'll call us to order. I guess we have 7:03 p.m. on 6/26, and we can start off with a roll call. I guess maybe to my left, and we'll go around.
Brian Smith.
Pete Swain.
Planning Board.
Jamie Rabbit, Director of Planning.
Sue Mittendorf.
Amy Crawford.
And Josh Port. Yeah, a little bit of technical difficulties still to get through, but all good. Good to see you all here, and also welcome to the committee. Much appreciated having another member fill. It's always been a bit of a battle trying to keep the ranks full, so much appreciate having you here.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I think the first thing to jump into then is item C on the agenda, which is going to be the approval of the minutes. So did anybody have any comments on, I guess, either of the minutes to share? All right, seems like no. I think I had one comment myself on the 4:30 minutes, which is just that the RIPTA contact for the Kingston Station project is Ella Ackerman, E-L-L-A, and I think it's in there as Al Ackerman. Just a minor change, but that was all I had. So I guess with that correction, maybe we could have a motion to approve those minutes.
Do we get separately or together?
I'd say, well, if nobody has anything to say on either, might as well just do it together.
I think we approved the 4:30 and the 5:12 draft minutes.
Any second?
I second.
Awesome. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Cool. All right, the minutes are approved. So that brings us to item D on the agenda, which is correspondence and public comment. Looks like we have a couple of folks here today. So if there's a comment that either of you would like to make, you can feel welcome. Hopefully we can get a microphone for you. I don't know if the one on the stand there is working. Okay. Was the consensus you both are okay, just observing for now? Or you were both just looking to observe? That's all good. Welcome. Yeah, that's perfectly good. Honestly, it's great to have people here. A lot of times we'll get no folks, so it's excellent. Oh, sure. No, absolutely. Well, yeah, I appreciate you showing up. That's great. Awesome. Well, I guess we can move then into E on the agenda, which is new business. The first item under there is elections, which is possible action to elect one or more officers following the resignation of our chair. So as alluded to, we did lose actually a couple of members, including the chair, in the past month or so. I am the vice chair, which is why it's also falling to me to lead this meeting. I think it's a good thing to at least discuss. As it's been in the past, it seems like, contrary to many committees, we seem to have a bit of a power vacuum as opposed to power grabbing. There are a lot of people who don't seem to want to be the chair. I think from where I sit, usually we've been doing, at the start of every new year, we do new elections, and we can switch it up then. We've been alternating the chair quite a lot. Next year in particular is going to be the last year of my PhD. I am going to be swamped. I'm not going to be looking to be the chair. I am totally willing to, continue to act as chair for the time being if nobody wants to do it. With that said, if people would want to do that, or if you want to, maybe you want to do the whole, like somebody wants to nominate someone else, I'm totally fine with that and would embrace somebody else to go for it until January. So if anybody has any thoughts, any interest, any disinterest, feel free to speak up.
I'd just like to kind of put it out there to ask if anybody else has an interest to speak now.
I believe, are you the longest serving member also? Or is Amy?
We started around the same time. You might be a month ahead of me. Yeah, something like that.
So I think there's something to be said for experience and,
At my ripe old age of 30, my
Yeah, well,
overwhelming experience.
well.
But I'm okay with that. I think if nobody is in particular looking to, to take over as chair, I'm happy to, to basically keep running things for the next 6 months or so, and then we can have proper elections in January. Is that okay with like procedural stuff, or?
The only thing I would potentially recommend, Josh, is from a standard point, you would have a chair, a vice chair, secretary. If you don't fill the position of chair and you sit as vice chair, in your absence, you wouldn't have anyone to conduct a meeting. So if you're okay no one wants to be chair, I think it would be appropriate that take a nomination for chair, then take a nomination for vice chair, nomination for secretary, vote. If you're all comfortable with the slate, you can just vote on the entire slate. So that in your absence, if you are elected chair, there is a vice chair. Maybe it's Amy, maybe it's Richard or Pete or Brian or Susan, if one of you step up, so that you still can continue to conduct business.
Totally.
Amy is currently secretary.
You mind if I just interject something, because I got to walk out? So I just scheduled a meeting, it's very applicable to this, with Secretary Goddard. It was supposed to be scheduled on June 24th, but they had to postpone it. So it's going to be July 17th, 10:30 a.m. to 12 noon. You're invited to it, Luke is too. So the purpose of that is, this is an important meeting we've been working on for a while, and after I talked to the governor about some of the affordable housing initiatives and money that he has. So what's contingent on how well these projects will go is how much funds we can get, grant funding, especially for South Road School. So that's going to be the hard sell to them, that we have some very beautiful properties that we'd like to repurpose, which the governor and the speaker and everyone's on board with. So let's see what we can do. But I just want to make you know, I just scheduled it, and then remember Jamie was in here with this stuff. So all right. So, and once again, thank you very much for volunteering and doing what you do, and hopefully we get some good stuff over the finish line in short order. Okay.
Is that a public meeting, and what's the date?
What
Is that a public meeting that you just scheduled, or is that
a public community meeting?
meeting?
No, ma'am.
No?
No, that is a private meeting with me as the town manager, Jamie's the planning director,
Okay.
Luke Murray. It's to bring them to all three properties so they can view them. And I'm sorry, I should have said that in the beginning. So they can view them, and we'll be putting forth requests on infrastructure improvements, roads, sewers, where it's applicable, water, curbs.
So we would meet here at 10:30?
No,
Oh,
we're
okay.
going right to the sites.
Okay.
So it's going to be just us going, and then we'll report to you. I think that's the best way to do it, to be
Okay.
quite honest with you, a little more private, and see what they can say. And but I'm very hopeful we can figure something out. Okay?
So,
Yes.
Who exactly is going to be meeting with the three of you? Who's going to be coming down to view?
Secretary Goddard of the state of housing,
Yep, that's it.
and her finance people as well.
And fine. I just want to get on.
No, that's fine. That's
Thank
fine.
you. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt the meeting. I just figured this is very applicable, and you guys would probably want to hear it, because you probably haven't even seen it yet, the email I sent. Oh, you just did? All right. Okay. You're right on, Jamie.
yeah.
All right. All right. Any more questions for me?
Yeah, what was the date again? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. That's okay. It's July 17th,
Okay.
10:30 a.m. to 12 noon.
Okay.
They'll come down, they'll view everything. Now they can visualize what we have, what the vision is, and then we'll make a hard sell for funds to help us with the infrastructure, and then we'll see where it goes from there, and hopefully we get some good news and move on. Okay?
Great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'll see you Monday,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, enjoy. So Jamie, Amy is currently secretary, so I don't think we need to nominate anyone to be secretary.
Unless Amy wants to be vice chair.
Oh, well, good point.
I think he was setting her up.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know, after doing this secretary,
Okay.
no, that's fine, I'll stay here, I'm getting used to it, so.
Gotcha. Well, would anybody like to be vice chair? I think responsibilities are limited to basically just backing up the chair when the chair is not there or unable, or if there's an occurrence like this where the chair is dropping out or something. So any interest?
From my perspective, Rich has the best handle on sort of the whole housing piece, and so I would put forth a nomination to chair, vice chair, secretary. So I nominate Amy as secretary, Rich as vice chair, Josh as chair.
If it makes you feel better, Rich, I think there is one meeting in September that I can't be here for, and other than that, I'm not planning to miss any. But again, totally up to you if you'd be willing to do it.
I'm okay with it. I'll explain it to my wife. But I actually am not going to be here in September either for that.
Oh, okay.
So
Well,
we'll have to make arrangements somehow or figure it out. But, yeah.
Gotcha. All right, well, I guess if folks are mostly feeling good about that, sounds like, I guess, did you just so move? Do we need just a second for that?
Yeah, so moved.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor of that?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll go forward with that. Sounds good. Yay for leadership. Okay.
Just a quick comment
Yes.
on that, though. If we know in advance that 2 people are not going to be here for September, we may want to consider talking about changing the date of the meeting.
Yes.
I mean, if the chair and the
Yeah.
vice chair are not going to be here.
We can send out a doodle poll on what the availability is of both staff, meeting rooms, and members of the collaborative, as well as what you potentially have as agenda items. There's always a chance that the agenda is light, and you can just push to the following month. So we'll evaluate that as time moves on.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. We'll move forward then to item 2, which is talking about the draft RFP for South Road Housing Project. As basically the town council had discussed this back on the 16th, and I unfortunately wasn't there, but I had heard that there was some discussion, for example, if the AHC had weighed in on this to any extent. Some of the purpose of this is basically to do that, to just give thoughts on basically how we're feeling about this RFP, and if we have any feedback to maybe provide. Especially, it's nice with Jamie here as well. You know, I don't know exactly how the timing for all this works, but maybe at least we can have sort of a voice on the record now for what our thoughts as a committee are. So I guess I'll open it up to other folks. Did people have a chance to look through this, and does anybody have any initial reactions to it, and also to the meeting on the 16th if you were able to be there?
So Rich was in attendance and had some thoughts, I believe, and I listened to it, that section of the meeting that was related to this. So, yes, I do have thoughts, but it sounded like you did as well, some thoughts on the wording in the RFP.
I do, but I don't necessarily need to go first. So,
Josh, if you don't, can I just give a little bit of background?
Sure.
Just so everybody's aware. Because again, we have some new members, and if I'm repetitive or going back too far, or you already know what I'm saying, just say, Jamie, stop. We're aware of that. Now, I won't be offended. I just want to give background and kind of set the table for where we've been and where we've gone. So just going kind of a little bit further back in June of 2024, our department did a presentation with the town council about affordable housing and the potential for a public-private partnership and how that would potentially work. And I'm just going to go through a couple of quick slides here where we talked about in any relationship, public-private, there's a distribution of resources and a distribution of responsibilities, and you can look at it as a weighted scale. And when there's the public's involved, they have a large role in providing land and setting design standards, and you're relying on the public to assume, the private side to assume the risk, design the units, build the units, maintain the units, finance construction, and take care of all that. So there's a heavier burden on the private side, but the public side's controlling everything. You can then tip the scales in the other way, where the public becomes a little more involved. You're providing land, maybe you're going to do the infrastructure improvements, you're going to curate the beneficiaries, you're going to set the design standards, you may even be involved in the the financing side, it wouldn't be the municipality, but you're arranging with third-party entities, being a state, federal government, or local banks. Then the private side does a little bit less. That also exchanges risk, and it also exchanges where the dollars and the cents go. So as the responsibilities tip, so do the financial obligations. So we did this over a year ago, and we did some simple math back then, just looking at South Road as 40 lots. And we did an analysis at 50-50 and 60-40. And one of the thoughts early on is that if you just looked at the value of land, and assuming in a heavy public involvement where maybe you're doing the infrastructure improvements, that in a perfect world, if we all could wave a magic wand, we could say, look, South Road site is shovel ready. And what I mean by shovel ready is we already tore down the school, we brought sewer to the site, we brought water to the site, we built the roads, and we actually have individual lots. And someone gave us a really big, briefcase full of money to do that. And if that were to occur, what would that look like? And what would the value of that land be, right? And I see Rich nodding, so he understands a little bit. So if you went out in the marketplace today and had 40 house lots, everybody looks on Zillow, house lots range between $300,000 and $400,000 a house lot. So if you just do simple math and you even be extremely conservative and say in that 40 analysis that you put 24 market rate lots out there at $100,000, you could generate $2.4 million in revenue. If you put them out there at $200,000, you could generate $4.8 million in revenue. That's a substantial amount of revenue that could subsidize the construction of affordable units. And the subject matter is germane because this is really what a nonprofit does, or a for-profit affordable housing developer, because they need to make the math work. Everything has to pencil out. You're either going to get a very substantial subsidy from somewhere, or it needs to pencil out without the subsidy. So I was trying to explain to the council that there is value in the land, but you can't get to that value of the land until you make the infrastructure improvements. And I'm going through this relatively quickly, but fast forward a year later, and we have Union Studios and the Peregrine Group come in and develop some concepts for the council. We meet at all of the sites. We have meetings with the planning board, EDC, Housing Collaborative. You all get a chance to weigh in. Some may feel it was a limited opportunity. Some feel it was a really good opportunity, but it was an opportunity. And we can debate whether it was good, bad, or indifferent at another time. But the Peregrine Group had to set a baseline. So when they looked at South Road School, they looked at the development of 44 residential homes, which is what Union Studios developed with their final concept plan that the council seemed to like better than the 3 original concept plans. So when you looked at that, they had to pencil it to kind of make the spreadsheet work on the economic side. So they picked a 50-50 split. Someone has to establish that baseline. And no matter what you establish at it, someone's going to be happy about it, someone's not going to be happy about it, and someone may be okay with it. Developing that number, there's no win for that person developing the number. It's going to potentially be upsetting to someone. Peregrine set the number at 50 affordable, 50 market rate, and then broke the affordable units down to 11 of those units, so it would break down to 22-22. Peregrine set the units at 11 at 80% AMI and 11 units at 100% AMI, with 22 units being market rate. Now, and then they develop that value. When you develop that value, there's a market for the market rate homes, and then there's a set value, because you can't exceed a price for the 80% AMI and the 100% AMI, and then they did the analysis on the financial costs. When they did that analysis, there was a in excess of a $5 million deficit. That deficit equated to, we'll just go down a slide. That was what we talked about originally. If I had that magic, briefcase full of money, that's the $5 million of infrastructure costs. That's building the roads, demoing the school, solidifying the environmental, and looking at roads and infrastructure. So there was a funding gap, and they did the analysis of the funding gap, and I won't dive too deep into that. Again, looking at the recommended next steps, they were asking us potentially to refine the infrastructure costs, get a better handle on demo and environmental. We have a good handle on demo. We did get a pre-estimate of just around $500,000 for that. We don't have a 100% solid number on any environmental issues. There may be a former underground storage tank on that site. Again, if that's clean, it's relatively inexpensive to pull that out of the ground, but if you pull it out of the ground, test the soil, and the soil's got an issue, then the cost is higher. We have procurement issues, and then we still have the fact that it's zoned government institutional. It's not zoned for single-family, multifamily homes at this time, so there's a permitting process with that. And then we have to look at where's the level of funding coming from the state or the federal government. So again, everybody recognized, even at a 50-50 split, this project needs to be heavily subsidized by someone, government or a developer. So I was charged, or our department was charged with developing an RFP. And in developing that RFP, I had, I'm going to say many masters. I had a neighborhood community who wanted a high quality project that didn't impact their neighborhood significantly, was of like kind and quality to the style and investment of the homes made in that area. I had the town council who wanted, again, if everything was perfect and we had the resources, a 100% affordable housing project. But early on, there was some discussion about what the complexity and makeup of the project, and I think, Josh, you actually spoke about this, I think at one meeting. If I misspeak, correct me that, in some aspects there are, full market rate projects, there are fully affordable projects, and in some aspects, there are pluses and minuses to both of those, and there's probably a sentiment out there that says, you may not want to do 100% affordable. You may want to do a mixed social economical development, which means there's some market rate and there's some affordable, and you get diversity within the community. Is that a fair statement of what you said?
I don't recall saying that, but at the same time, that is a thought that I've heard expressed. I don't doubt that somebody said it at the meeting, so
okay.
That's all fair.
But again, so there's the complexity of what is the mix. There's a council who would like to see the affordable units be maximized, and then we have the economics of everything. So I'm charged with writing an RFP, developing standards for some type of, I don't want to say definite certainty of what the project's going to look like, but at least some guardrails. That if you're expecting to get X style of house, X style of building materials with nice windows, you don't end up with no architectural details, 412 roofs instead of 812 roofs, pork chop returns versus nice returns on the roofs, or porches where you're thinking you're going to have nice support columns with bases and caps, and you end up with a 4-inch spindle going from floor to the porch roof. So it's building those parameters. And then you got to pencil it out, so you want to maximize the number of people who are going to reply and leave it somewhat open. So that was my challenge. And then I had to pick a baseline. I wanted to say to the council, and I did, that this is a draft RFP subject to review. It's not final yet, and we're looking for your input, and we're looking for others' input. and kind of that's where we are. So the baseline that I put on the table, I'm not standing here, nor did I stand in front of the council to say, as the planning director, I absolutely think you should do X, Y, and Z. I have to do something for people to react to. So in doing that, I tried to be as specific, but also as flexible as possible. The numbers I used in the draft RFP were minimum of 25% affordable. So you would have a 25 affordable, 75% market rate. Within the evaluation matrix, the more affordable units you bring to the table, the more points you would get in the evaluation of the RFP. Within the affordability ranks, I had 60, 80, 100, and 120 for AMI to give someone the most flexibility in trying to get the project to pencil out to become economically feasible. And also, the more economically feasible it is, the more definitive they can be on a start and finish date. So I think one of the discussions is if for discussion purposes, say, Jamie, we want a 100% affordable project. All right, and we'll say we all agree there's a $5 million funding gap. I can't put a shovel in the ground until I fill that $5 million funding gap. Now I'm in line with every other affordable housing project in the state asking for the $5 million because I can't get it out of the build. It can't come from the build and it can't come from the build sale. It's got to come from somewhere. So, Massachusetts, there's a lot of developments recently in Massachusetts. They're struggling with this. There's actually an article in Boston, in the Boston Globe, that just talked about Massachusetts and the fact they have a similar comprehensive permit. It's within their statutes and law, and they're struggling in the Boston Metro because of land values of accomplishing 75-25 because of construction costs, land costs, and the cost to borrow money. So right now, a lot of projects in Massachusetts are stymied in the higher valued communities because it doesn't work economically for a developer to do a 75-25. The math just does not work. So again, everybody's looking for subsidies. Federal government gives money to the states, states give money to the developers, for-profit, non-profits, it's all coming from kind of the same chest. So I'm open to any discussion. I'm not here to argue a point or, you'll never see me as a planning director, slam my fist on the table and say, no way, you guys are crazy, you can't do that. To me, this is a broad discussion. I'm looking for your input. Maybe there's 4, 5, 6, 10 things that you can make recommendations that when I go back to the town manager, when we talk to the town council, we can say, hey, we talked to affordable housing. I think they understand the baseline, but they would prefer to see it set at 40, 60, 30, 70, or leave it at 25, 75, but put language in there that says you're really aspiring to be at this, but you also understand the economics with funding and the availability of funds. In the end, we want to attempt to provide as many affordable units to the community that we can in a kind of a decent time frame, deliverable, that's also sustainable over time. Anyone have any questions? Again, that's flying at 10,000 feet, doing it very quickly, but hopefully it provides a little bit of background of where we were and where we've come to. So,
I think that's really helpful context, and thank you for sharing that. I guess we can push it back over to one of Peter and Rich, whichever one of you wanted to speak first. It seemed like you were about to give thoughts.
So I would say first, Jane. No, it's Preston. I do think that you collectively, the town, yourself, made some significant changes from when Union Studios first presented this. I think Union Studios wasn't thinking that they had to provide the kind of information we were looking for. So it's good to see that you've looked at that 60% figure, for instance, that you've really thought about what some of this is going to require. I just have a few things. I'm sure Rich has more. it would seem to me that the more density we can create, the lower that unit price is going to go down. So rather than 44, does South Road have the capacity to do 60 units, for instance? And I think that, just by the mathematics, will help drive the price per unit down, I would assume. I also felt like, and I think Rich may have made this point at the meeting, I love the variation in designs of those homes, but some of them could be simplified, and I think that would drive costs down as well. I don't want them all to be boxes by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think they all need to have gables. I don't know that they all need to have extensive porches. I don't want to create too much discrepancy between them because we want to have a feel for a community, but I think that by changing some percentage of them to simpler designs while keeping some of them, maybe a little bit more complicated, could also drive the price down, it would seem to me. And to that extent, I know that they were thinking about stacked flats for Wakefield, and I don't know why you wouldn't want to do some stacked flats for South Road, but there may be a good reason for it that I'm not aware of. I'm not sure. But it would seem to me that that would also potentially drive the cost down to some extent if you could do that. I have 2 points that you didn't reference, but I sort of are important to me. I would certainly love to see it be more than 30 years. I feel like 30 years is a very short period of time to have these conditional, and I guess I've seen situations where it started at 30 years, the minute the 30 years is up, and if this is ownership, that might not be the issue, but it could still be an issue, because as soon as 30 years is up, a developer's going to come in and redo them all and sell them at twice the price. If the affordability criteria dies after 30 years, they're going to get redeveloped as more expensive units, in my opinion. From that perspective, I would also like to see the sustainability piece use language that gives additional points for people building in more sustainability to their designs, whatever that might be. I don't know. Solar, heat pumps, building materials that are more sustainable. It was noted, I saw, in the RFP, but it wasn't given a point value for doing more to that end. So, thoughts? I've said.
If I can, just one clarification on the 30 years. So in the RFP, a couple of things, I'll just back up. You're proposing push towards the 60%. I had in the RFP, it's the town's RFP, not my RFP. It was done so I'll apologize up front if I say I or the department. It's really the town's RFP. But when we developed it, the parameters were 40 at a minimum, 60 at a maximum. And again, I guess you're leaning towards more density towards the 60 unit side, which is fair. And then the second aspect is all of these are all these are proposed for sale, none are proposed to be rental. So on the 30 years, you would potentially have the existing owner or second generation owner who applied that on the 31st year got substantial appreciation. There's some discussion during the year that we've been going through this process is 30 years too short? Habitat has the 99-year model where they keep the land lease, but one of the difficulties is there was a discussion on creating it's called the term generational wealth or generational appreciation. If it's more than 30 years, that's in essence one family that has to buy it at 30, hold it to 60, and they get appreciation in that analysis when they turn 61. So it's one generation gets the appreciation. I don't have an answer of whether the 99-year model is better or whether the 30-year model is better. I think some of the discussion I've heard on the national side and this discussion, and again being at national conferences for American Planning Association, I just sat through 5 days of Congress of New Urbanism in Providence and went to every affordable housing thing that I could, and saw a lot of good stuff coming nationally. One of the things that came back is there's just a cautionary tale of reinvestment in the property when the existing owner can't see any appreciation. So if you're that owner who's holding on to the home at year 1 to year 25, at year 25, if they go to sell, they may not put any money in the home, or they may not be maintaining it, because they know in year 25, when I go to sell it, I'm getting no substantial appreciation. The only appreciation I get is a change in the AMI of the region. But in some aspects, we've seen this in the last 5 years. If someone bought a home at 3.5%, affordable house, 3 years later needed to sell it, they were selling it at a loss because interest rates went up to 6.5 and the AMI didn't change. So they actually had to sell it for less than they paid for it. Any financial advisor will tell you a house is not an investment. You cannot guarantee appreciation, but it was a cautionary tale that even though there's some expectation that AMI goes out, that's assuming interest rates stay the same. So you get some level of appreciation over time. It's not going to keep pace with the market rate, but there have been some of the not-for-profit builders as well as the for-profit affordable builders who are just saying, just be aware of this, that if you're trying to build a community and a reinvestment in that community space, just be concerned about the reinvestment in properties and the upkeep of properties when an owner knows they're not getting any appreciation, versus someone's maintaining their property because they know, just if I hold it for a couple more years, I'll fix the roof, I'll redo the kitchen, I'll keep the floors up, I'll paint my house because there's a light at the end of the tunnel. It's a cautionary tale. I actually sat in a session and asked the question, what's the magic year? And you know, there were giggles in the audience because there is no magic year. If you say 40 years, it just moves that discussion to the 30 to 40 year scenario. If you move it out to 40 years, there is a roof replacement somewhere in there where someone's going to have the expense to replace the roof with no added appreciation. So and again, I understand the 99-year lease with Habitat, and again, it could happen that there's a mix in this project. So in writing the RFP, I really tried to put it out there to say, hey, applicants, responders, be creative. Come up with something that's unique, that we're trying to give you that flexibility that gives you something back. With some we're really aspiring for this. But thank you, Peter, for your comments.
Okay, so I think the overall structure of the RFP is great. I think the content in it really spoke to the intent of the town council and what the town is trying to do with the 3 properties. I guess it's first a question on, there's a 2-page document that precedes it with goals and objectives and bulleted comments. Is the intent that information goes out with the RFP, or was that more to give town council kind of a
That was a little
guidance?
bit of plate setting the table.
Okay.
But I think the RFP is a document.
Yeah.
I think what goes with the document is the PowerPoint presentation from June of 2024, the PowerPoint presentations, all of the stuff that Union Studios did, all the stuff that Perini did,
Okay.
and then also there's probably a 1 or 2 page introductory
Like a summarization.
summary that hasn't been written yet.
Okay.
That, here's the hard RFP. However, the council is looking for getting closer to 50%, getting closer to 60 and 80 AMI, and maybe not 100 and 120. So again, it gives a little bit more direction, but still allows flexibility. Because again, you may get a bunch of responders who come back and say, we would have loved to do 100 or more 60, more 80. it just doesn't pencil out with the availability of funds.
Yeah, so the reason I ask that is because in reading that page and a half summary and then reading through the document, there seemed to be, at least the way I read it, some contradiction of, in the document and the prose in the document, the verbiage very much speaks to affordable housing, affordable target kind of direction. And if we're going to do a summary before that, my thought would be that we would want to lead the thinking of whoever responds to be more towards the affordable side of the solution versus the heavier on the market rate side, meaning not offer the, I think they all know that there's a 25% minimum on a development of a certain size, so not offer the 25% minimum, but just say the intent is to build as much affordable housing as possible on this, that's feasibly possible on this property. Because I think sometimes when we put numbers in their heads, they stick there and then the planning goes around that versus, again, leave it more open. So if there's a kind of a more summarized document that goes with that, my recommendation would be that we stay away from specific numbers and just kind of lead them to the pros that are already in the body of the RFP itself.
Yeah, I would say the only comment I had to that is that I would want to set a base
Yes, I understand that.
so that I don't want someone to, these are not going to be inexpensive
No, right.
endeavors to put an RFP together.
Yes.
So I wouldn't want someone to say, well, I'm reading this and they say they want to shovel in the ground soon, so I'm going to do 80-20 or 90-10. And it's like, no, that's a non-starter.
Yeah.
But again, I think that introductory page or two that says, the RFP contains minimum, however, the aspirations of the council are.
Okay.
And I'm hearing, density higher than 44 units from Peter. I'm hearing, more than 25% affordable, closer to 50, and we're giving them, hey, here are the guardrails, but we're looking somewhere maybe a little more in the middle of the right and left guardrail.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I think that's good. I've read a couple other, which I'm sure you and your team did as well, other proposals that were done in other states and other places. I feel like the scoring system is, in terms of the value assignments, could be higher on the affordables piece than it is currently structured. Because I think that would help kind of create some incentive for the developers to recognize there's more points for that versus less in terms of the numbering. To Peter's point as well, when I think about my experience with Habitat and the other things, I think there's an opportunity, given that we know 60 new houses in that area is going to put a burden on water and sewer and other things as well, that maybe we raise the bar a little bit on energy sustainability expectations, things like water sense and indoor air quality and I mean, solar is mentioned and so forth, but I think if we put an expectation on a level of green building, that also makes the long-term cost of ownership cheaper, right? It does. I mean, it raises, I get it, we're buying PVC trim versus, common pine, and there's a big price difference, but from a sustainability perspective, that's less going into a landfill potentially and things like that over time. And it's less long-term cost to the homeowners that live there and less upkeep, right? So from a manageability perspective, they don't have to worry about painting every 3 or 4 years or 5 years because the trim is peeling. So I think there's opportunity there just in kind of what I'd call the green space. The term workforce housing is used in there, but I would either recommend not using workforce or defining it, because we do have the affordable definition that you put in there, and I think it's meant to be affordable workforce housing is the way the wording goes, but maybe just if we use a workforce, connect it back somehow to the Rhode Island definition of affordable, or have another definition in there so that whoever bids on it understands that they're really targeted the same thing. It's just, it's taking a workforce angle versus an individual family kind of angle on it, is my thought. I think it would be, like Jim just mentioned, it might be beneficial to offer the developers a site day, right? Like a 2-hour or 3-hour window. We'll have people on the sites, or this site if this is the first targeted one. You're welcome to come out, walk the land, see what it looks like, see what the topology looks like, and maybe we don't have all the answers on it, but it might help whoever's going to bid also get a kind of a feel and a lay of the land where they can ask you or whoever's there questions that, maybe mulling in their head as they're looking at the items there. What else? Scoring. Talked about the range a little bit in terms of the 80. The one thing I do know from, and it's kind of an interesting statistic, a lot, when you go up to the 120 AMI, which is the range we're looking at going up to, which I think makes sense because of the size, and I think having an expectation of being 100% given the infrastructure cost and all that is wrapped around it probably doesn't make sense. You're going to have a nice mix of market and whatever in there. A lot of people who come into affordable housing at the 125 AMI level end up being cost burdened over the 30% monthly allocation. So they're buying up, probably with the hopes of their salaries catching up to afford it. But I think we want to be careful about getting too high on the 100, and again, offering it because that's where the town's discussion is and town council's discussion is. But somehow the diligence around the individuals that are selected for the properties to buy or offer the properties to buy are financially not going to overburden themselves. And I mean, there's clearly Habitat speak that is screaming in the back of my head because we do an incredible, the team, not myself, but we have a team that does an incredible job of actually financially qualifying applicants before they're approved for the purchase of a home to make sure that they don't have a bad debt to equity ratio, that they're managing their credit wisely, that they'll have a certain amount of deposit unavailable at closing. And so there's a number of pieces there that go along with not just selling a house to an individual or a family, but selling a house to a person that's been educated and prepared and ready for that opportunity. So I don't know how you blend some of that into an RFQ. It gets kind of murky, but just some ideas there. There was, just typographically, there was a reference to National Grid in there, which I think should be Rhode Island Energy now, if I'm not mistaken. So just as it's probably just a carryover from something else you were doing. I still call it National Grid, but just in terms of.
I still have CLMP in Connecticut versus Eversource, so.
Yeah.
Or Northeast Utilities before Eversource.
And then I guess the one other thing that I will come back to is I think, two things. I think the more we try to prescribe the architecture in the context of cottage-style home and visual, the more difficult it will be for a developer to potentially bid that project, and it will definitely add cost if we prescribe too many, what I think of in my mind as aesthetically nice to look at, but add no functional value to the operation of the home. So extra gables, different types of trims, as I think of Habitat, when we put porches on, we use a 4x4 or a 6x6 or 6x4 post. It's not painted, it's not decorated, it's not columned, it's basic. So, and when I look across the street at Taft Hill and some of the other neighboring developments there, there's a lot of similar builds like that there. They're very common style, buildings from an architecture perspective. So I think while I agree with you, we should have a set of constraints that we want them to build by or design by, so that we don't get 40 ranch houses in 5 different colors, but, you know, an exact replica of every single neighborhood. I think we need to be a little bit more open in the architectural constraints that we may put on them in the design. Again, it's my thoughts and opinions. And then the second point is, I feel like there's still a lot of questions that the town council needs to come to terms with and answer before we go out to developers. Things like, are they going to lease the land, or are they going to sell the land, or are they going to do something else? Is there a consideration, as you just said earlier, that the town brings the sewer up to the development and then the water up to the development and cuts the roads, maybe rough cut but not final cut? All of those things, the cost is either on the developer or it's on the town or it's in a grant somewhere. But I think if we don't know as a town what we plan to commit to, but we go out to ask developers to do something, my gut says you're going to get a lot of first questions back about that infrastructure situation that you're not going to be able to answer unless the town council gives you an answer, which they may or may not be ready to do. So I think it's great that we're almost ready to go out to RFP, but I think town council still owes you and the community some decisions and directions on some of what are going to be, I think, very critical decision points to guide you and to guide the developers. Yes.
See what number 1 is?
Yes.
See what number 5 is?
Yep.
Somehow, we're already at 5.
I know. Yes. Right. And I was glad to see them slow it down the other night and not vote on it, because I do think that the more we can press the town council for thinking about and talking about, and maybe they need another special session just on the topic of South Road School to try to come to some terms with what is the town willing to take on for obligation and commitment and financial commitment, and what are we going to ask the developer to do? Because there's a lot of work a developer has to do to go put the 20-year financials together and all of that, and the first thing they're going to come up with is a lot of questions that we aren't going to have answers for.
Right, and I agree with you, Rich, and that's why I started with the presentation I made back in 2024 in June to show the scale. Right. And although we're involved as a municipality, there's still that scale still tipped towards the development community.
Yes.
Whether they're for-profit affordable, right, nonprofit affordable, or just someone who's going to get into this new realm.
Right.
And to your, it's going to pencil in very differently if sewer's at the doorstep.
Right, absolutely.
Than if sewer's still in front of the old Curtis Corner School.
Right.
And someone's scratching their head, can I bring it in via the trail? Do I have to do it in the street? Can I go cross country?
Right.
One thing that Mr. Manning mentioned tonight is that meeting with the state, and we were scheduled to meet with them this past Tuesday, but some schedules had to change, so we're trying to get these answers. Right. And again, the fact that council slowed down, I am 100% on board with that I think the more answers we have before the RFQ goes out, the better responses we're going to get. Where if someone said, I can only pencil this at 75-25 because of the infrastructure costs and the unknowns, maybe I can pencil the same project in at 60-40 because sewer's at my doorstep, right, and I don't have to worry about funding for $5 million, and I have some certainty.
Right.
Right. We're also going to be applying, there's some new grant money that's coming out where we may be able to quickly do an engineering evaluation and refine the cost to get sewer in the route we would take. And there may be 3 routes. Could be overland through Curtis Corner's property. It could be going on the side of the trail, working with the state so we don't have to repave a road.
Right.
We're only regrassing and looming the side of a trail, or we're coming in the street. And there's 2 ways we can come in the street. Right. So again, A lot of the things you're saying are up here and have been said. It's, you know, I was tasked 4 weeks ago to do 6 weeks ago to do an RFP that was in rough draft in the town manager's office 2 weeks after that request, and we were before the council a little over a week ago. So.
And so I would ask, how can we help you as a committee help reinforce some of the need to the town council for you so that because again, if the RFP goes out and we don't have those answers,
Yeah.
or you're gonna get the calls and you're not gonna get responses because they're not gonna have answers.
You know, and one of the, sometimes, you know, we use the old adage, and I've been at this a long time, so I have a lot of, if I tell too many stories, tell me to stop. But sometimes you need to slow down to speed up.
Yeah.
You know, that these projects, in their best scenario, take 5 to 7 years. You know, I'm remiss to advise anyone there'll be a shovel in the ground this fall. But,
Maybe
you know,
not even
and I
next
think part of that is, you know, Rich, you have experience, you're in the industry, others have done, you know, you're Googling stuff, you're reading other RFQs, and if you're looking at those, if you look at an RFP or a project, try and go back and find when that project became an idea. And then there's one in Orleans, 5 years, put the RFP out. They're over $3 million into it because they had in this scenario, the town bought the property for $2.85 million. Then they just hired consultants to see what they can do with this property they bought. And they debated that for a few years. And then they had a committee develop the RFP, which the new town manager said they would never do again. They would only do it via staff. Because they had difficulties evaluating the responses when they came in because of inconsistencies in the RFP that was developed. And now they're waiting for funding. So they don't have a shovel in the ground yet. And they only had 2 responders, one who backed out after there was some discussions of communications between parties that may not have occurred or should not have occurred. And they're waiting. And it's a good project, but they all take time. And in some essence, if you slow down to get it right, you actually speed it up on the backside of it.
I'm 100% advocate of spend 80% of your time in planning and 20% in execution, because execution goes much better when you take the time to plan it out right.
And,
I'm right there with you.
And I think what I've heard from Rich and Pete that have spoken tonight is that there's some cleanup, there's some discussion that needs to occur or go to the higher end of some of the parameters. And again, I had to write something. I have to put something down for people to react to, right? I got some people happy, some people not happy, and a couple people okay with it. I've done a halfway decent job. I may have more important people who aren't happy, but that's okay. We'll get there. But I think part of it is understanding and advocating for, we don't want to lose, I'm going to go to one slide in the presentation. Oops, sorry, it's the wrong one. Got too many presentations up. We didn't want to lose sight of this, and you can agree or disagree that we want a project that stands the test of time. We want to utilize the best examples from the past. We want a goal that it's integrated, well-designed, fits seamlessly, and it serves kind of the community. And are there standards you want to advocate that you're unwilling to kind of compromise on? Do you want it, we'll use the term, do you want it to look like a 1960 military base? Where everyone's going to say, no, we don't. I probably know the answer, but do you want 40 houses that look the same? They just changed the color, but they're still the same, except one's got a left door, one's got a right door. They all have 6, 12 roofs. They all maybe have a simple porch. You want some variation. You may have a developer who comes in, I can do it better, I can use certainty, Signature Series vinyl siding, people can power wash it. Are you willing to jeopardize that standard versus using Hardy Plank and AZEK? AZEK just being a name brand, there are other PVC products, there are other products other than Hardy Plank. What are you willing to compromise on? And some communities are gonna say that, or communities, you need to advocate for what you're not willing to compromise on. Because at some point, someone may make a decision to take something different and compromise on it. So if you're, as a collaborative, thinking there are certain things, like you may need to advocate for, we would rather see 50-50 affordable if we get the quality that we're looking for than 75 affordable, 25% market rate if we have a reduction in quality. Those are things I think moving forward you need to make decisions on and then advocate for, right? And you've all touched upon those historically in your discussions and even tonight. But I think as a committee, you need to continue the discussion and really look hard at, everybody sees the pretty renderings, and as a planner, I'm always challenged. Yeah, the architect showed us a beautiful building. It's not going to look like that when it's done. It's going to get valued engineer. Those beautiful street trees are going to end up being 1/2-inch twigs when they're planted 8 feet tall. What are you not willing to let go as a standard? And that's where you have to continue to have that discussion and potentially advise the council that, we would prefer to see a higher quality development with maybe a slightly lesser affordable aspect. Or we care less about the quality, we just want affordable. There's going to be that discussion and debate. And if someone responds to the RFP and you don't get to where you want to be, it is, from my perspective, it's okay to say no too.
But that's kind of my point around it. I'm not, and this isn't a slam against the town council, but I'm not convinced yet that they understand the gravity of the decisions of some of those details they need to decide for the project to be successful. And that's what I'm offering, is how do we as a committee and help you articulate that to the town council? Because my belief is they need 1 or 2 more specific not executive sessions, but special sessions just on the South Road process and the expectations that we have of them in order to make it successful the way they want it to be.
Maybe that's something you advocate for as a collaborative in a committee.
I'm not being critical here, it's probably water in the creek. But it seems to me this is a big kind of unknown for the town. And maybe doing a smaller project.
Josh, if I may, I'd like to hear from the committee first, and then if the chair wants to have the public respond, I can try and answer that. But just briefly, town council has decided and directed the planning department to prepare an RFP for South Road School. That was a decision that was debated. The planning department and the town manager's office initially recommended we look at Oliver Watson as a smaller project to kind of stick the toe in the water. The town council felt that it would not give the affordable unit jump start and asked us to deviate and look closer at South Road School. Also, in developing the RFP, we're using it kind of as a base model that can be transferable. Just change the density, change the dynamics, change what the maximum unit size is for Oliver Watson and Wakefield. Yeah. And Wakefield probably being the most complicated of the projects, given the varying dynamics of its location and future reuse. So.
I would like to just speak, many of the things you guys have really spoken
Amy,
really well.
if you can
about.
just-
It's not close enough.
Yeah, it won't,
Okay.
you won't get recorded. That's what we find.
Okay. So I just wanted to say, a lot of what I had written down on my list has been said very well by both Peter and Rich. And I wanted to start off by saying that I really appreciated this sort of point system that you were able to work in there with some, low bar, minimum requirements, and then, specifying that there's extra points. And I wonder if that can be specific about, so the person filling it, the developer knows the value of extra, extra density. Well, no, not extra, but what were the things for more of, thank you, more of the AMIs, more affordable housing and that kind of thing. So, thank you. So I really appreciated that, but I think it would be nice if we could somehow be specific about that. And the other things I just wanted to, at the risk of saying it, to repeat, I think it's important that, I also put it on the table that I do think that a higher density, going more toward the 60 would be good. Simplifying the variation, I really agree with that. And I think, Rich, you touched on that it can be very stylish and not have a lot of doodads, gables or whatever. So I think simplifying that is good because I would prefer more affordables to fancier, say, because I think you can work within the styles. Again, about sustainability and thinking not only of sustainable as far as carbon footprint, but that low-cost maintenance. If you've got good insulation, your heating costs aren't going to be high or as high or whatever. So I think that that's something that should be supported. Yep, and that's all.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for it. That's what I really wanted to say in the beginning of it. Thank you. I like the way you have it set up. I would just change some of those numbers.
Okay. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, I don't think I have a ton that's like fully new to add. Just things like I know there were things that felt a little too prescriptive to me, like things like specifying a maximum building height of 2 stories when I think the original B and C designs that the council agreed were sort of the best, and they had asked for basically a hybrid of that with the most recent draft. I think it was option C had some 3-unit multifamily or 3-story multifamily units, and I'm not saying to prescribe that. I'm just saying we talked about creativity. Like if I think my general perception is that having basically fewer distinct structures is going to allow people to do it cheaper. And so if you have, if you're still prioritizing aesthetics, we know that the community's spoken on this, that's something that matters, especially to people who are living close by. And so still not losing sight of that, but giving people a little bit more freedom to work. Like, for example, rather than specifying 5 specific housing types, at least say, just, we don't want it to feel cookie cutter essentially, but whatever creativity you can apply within that, sure. It feels weird to be if you had a very well designed 4, would it be the end of the world, right? Things like that. I think just in general, my sort of philosophy on this stuff, and I think this will come in more to play as this is adapted for Wakefield as well, but just detached single-family homes are just very expensive to build. And even if we do it in a cheap way, and which I think, and when I say cheap, I mean cost-effective. I don't mean cheap as in low quality. So I think all of the most recent drafts did have a primary, and I think it was correct that it said in there that there's primary, either single family or cottage style. That was what was in the plan. But just generally acknowledging that if the goal is affordable housing, we're trying to do it with a building that is inherently hard to make affordable, that it's a tough needle to thread. So I think if we're talking about what we value and what sacrifices we're willing to make, at least for me, some of I would be willing personally to sacrifice some of the more prescriptive specifics about, aesthetics and layout provided the whole is still attractive enough to be accepted by the community. And I think that's the beauty of accepting proposals, right? You let people basically give their best effort at making something that checks all of the boxes, and then pick the best of the bunch. And I think the only other thing I would really say is, that as others have said, I think just the relative importance in the rubric of things relating to affordable housing didn't seem to be where I would have wanted to see it. Like, for example, I think it was 40 points for design and sustainability, and I do think having some level of sustainability is important, but also just generally having increased amounts of units on the site, just generally more people in smaller space is inherently going to be sustainable. And so I think focusing on the percent affordable, the amount of actual units you're able to build above and beyond a comp permit, say, I think that's an important thing to focus on. Yeah.
Again, thank you, Josh. Just a couple, with regards to the 3 stories in the final concept plan, Union Studios had single-family, duplex, triplex. They didn't have fourplex, but they were still all two-story buildings with, a roof line associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, 3 stories would bring in the stack flats or something else. I know there was a comment earlier of looking at stack flats because you still can do it in a mansion home type house. Again, I mentioned earlier balancing. A lot of the designs were vetted through the community, through the workshops, and then digested by the council, who settled on this last rendition done by Union Studios. I tried to write it so there was still a little bit of flexibility within this design, that this isn't the end all of all designs, but you have to aspire to look something like this. The only other aspect is there are some developments in town that some would view as very dense, that without the sense of place or development of community or architecture associated with the density, people are viewing them as a product they don't necessarily aspire to have. I'm trying to find the right words. That's why I added a little more detail, to try and make sure that a developer understands that it's not like one of those, it needs to differentiate itself from that. And I have a couple examples, and again, most of you will understand it, even in these homes that I showed you, or the one on the top right, which is actually from Habersham and the Carolinas. You can take that house, it's a simple shoebox gable that has an addition on it. You can flip that, you can not do that, you can make that a shotgun house, you can add, there's certain variations to a shoebox that don't drive the cost up exponentially. So again, in that request for 5 variations, it's literally, guys, take one box and stick different components on it, and you easily come up with 5. The difficulty is we're trying to, from my perspective, express to an applicant that you need to hire some level of talent to pull this off. This isn't your run-of-the-mill engineering and house designer put something together and hope for the best. This is putting the correct design team to achieve a desired product. Because again, this is, houses, residential, commercial, sometimes are 15 to 20 year throwaway buildings. This is not a throwaway community. This is where a school used to be, that's already placed in a primarily single-family neighborhood that needs to blend seamlessly as much as it can with that neighborhood, and then be there for 200 years, if that's possible, because we have neighborhoods that have been here for 150 and almost 200 years, and we drive by them every day and appreciate them. So how can we replicate that? In that slide, learn from the past and bring that forward. We're trying to replicate a lot of the houses that are on High Street, and they were built when the mills were built, but they're slight variations of one another. but there's a lot of similarity there. And I think a really good design team can put that together. You know, the Union Studios, the Yuletide, the Allison and Ramsey's, the firms that do this is done in an afternoon. This isn't a 10-day, oh my God, what do we have to do? We've never done it before. We've done it 20 times in 20 different states. Let's just put our product out there. So.
Sure, that's appreciated. I think if that would be enough to constitute a different design, that doesn't worry me quite as much. With regards to the height, I agree. I don't want to deviate too much from what they've done, but I was at all or most of those meetings. I don't remember anybody specifically saying they must be 2-story. You know, I'm just trying to leave enough enough wiggle room within designs that the council really liked to give people the flexibility to make that proposal. Again, if you think that's a bridge too far, like again, everyone will have a different opinion on that. I'm just trying to, when trying to limit the specificity in order to empower developers to give their best shot, that's something that for me, that feels like something I would be willing to sacrifice. My opinions are not the opinions of everybody, so.
And I want to say, I may have it in a sentence in the RFP. I haven't memorized it verbatim yet, but I did contemplate either mentally or put it in there about a sentence or two that says, if you're going to deviate from like an above standard, just highlight that you are and why you felt it was necessary to do that.
Yeah.
It kind of gives them an out to say, we know the RFP said 2 stories, but we thought 2.5 was better. We did a traditional colonial with a second story and put a dormer on it, so we're really at 2.5 stories versus 1.5 stories, and we did that in the back right corner where no one's going to see it.
Yeah, I think you've got some places where you could put a design like that would be appropriate and not be offensive to the people.
Yeah. And one thing I will point out that changed between A, B, and C is on this one, some of the original drawings from Union Studios had units going all the way out to South Road, both on the north and south side. They have eliminated those and pulled it out. So you kind of have that traditional town green fronting South Road, and then your development starts.
I just feel like that back corner could have some higher buildings in it potentially, or something.
Yeah. Or potentially they're all walkouts, so your average is 2.5
Yeah.
stories.
And I think that would give you density without disturbing what people, particularly from South Road.
That whole southern swing
Yeah.
could be all walkouts at 2.5 stories.
Because believe me, there are houses on Taft Hill that look like that. A lot of them, in fact. So it wouldn't look out of place in relation to those houses.
I do have one other point that I forgot, and I'm kicking myself that I forgot it because it's important to me as we build. I think we should have some requirement around ADA. As a aging population trying to stay in homes versus nursing homes and other things, it doesn't really add any cost to design criteria and other things, but 5-foot circumference in main bathrooms for wheelchair accessibility, 42-inch wide hallways, clearances between countertops and kitchens and passageways. I think putting an element like that as a need and an expectation would be something that creates the home as a longevity investment versus a pass-through investment. And it doesn't cost the developer anymore to do some of that ADA compliance. Habitat does it in every home they build. Zero clearance entryways. I mean, there's a number of things that just prepare the house as somebody gets older in it for them to be able to continue to stay in it and live in it without having to invest in improvements or extensions or whatever to allow them to be there.
And it's actually funny that you mentioned that, Richard, because that was a discussion in a couple of the sessions at CNU about kind of that new urbanist village where everybody has a front porch. How do you then design that porch to potentially be retrofitted for the ramp? Like on a shotgun house, you maybe from the beginning, extend that porch beyond the front so you have a space for the ramp without having to redo the entire porch to accommodate it. You already have a point of contact for that ramp because it extended 4 feet past the house, and the ramp's already in where the shrubbery is. Pull the shrubbery out, add the ramp, and away you go. But from the street, still got that cute kind of, you know, New England-y shoreline look with the front porch and the cottage style. So,
With Habitat, we do 5-foot minimum decks as at least one of the 2 entryways that would enable a ramp to be added to from an accessibility perspective. And every entryway is 0 clearance. So you don't have a step from the deck into the house or the slider potentially into the house, or at least in one of those scenarios. So, and that again is from a building design perspective, there's no extra cost in that, but there's a huge benefit from a longevity perspective.
Is your recommendation, Rich, that all of, that 100% of the homes should be that way? Just based on, from your experience?
My recommendation is that, my thought is a good builder who wants to stay in business and continue to build what I consider high-quality homes, efficient, operating for the homeowners, and homes that enable people as they age to age in place without significant modification to the home, that any home a builder builds should have at least some of those basic features in them, and indoor-outdoor accessibility. Again, that is just we don't build the ramps, although we have a program called Ramp Up that if a homeowner needs a ramp, we'll go put it in for them. But we enable the design of the entryway to allow a ramp to be attached and make the ease of entry, if a wheelchair or a cane or crutches or whatever were needed and you couldn't go up and down steps. So the only potential additional cost is the ramp itself.
That's great. I'm going to propose, unless if anybody has a burning thing to say, that we move forward. We have a decent... Oh, do you have something to say? You can go for it, Sue.
I
Yeah.
just wanted to say thank you for going back a little bit further than gave me a better understanding of where it all started. And my one comment, feedback on the selection criteria is similar, maybe more points for the whole percentage of affordable and AMI. Thank you.
Sure.
So rentals, does this include any rentals? Or is that,
Brian, not at South, the council, again, looking at 3 sites, have steered us as a department in the town manager's office that South Road School would be purchase, would be home ownership based. Oliver Watson and Wakefield, primarily Wakefield, may be more pertinent for rentals
Yeah, that makes sense.
than South Road.
Yeah.
so you may know this, but I came from the Economic Development Committee, and one of the big issues that we were getting from the local businesses is affordable housing for their staff. The staff is not looking to buy a home, they're looking to rent. And either rent a single-family dwelling or an apartment, something that is affordable. It's not a career being a cashier at a local restaurant. So they may be here for a few years, and they may move on. They like to live close to where they work. And so even the bigger employers, like the hospital, they have to van pool these people in from Central Falls and Pawtucket because they can't afford to live here, and they're not in the market to get a mortgage. And they probably never will earn enough to go out and make a down payment. And so it's nice to say we're going to put a couple hundred single-family dwellings in, but you're not supporting the local workers. You're going to be bringing people in from outside the town, moving in, and what's the impact on that? As we're knocking schools down, now we have more people moving in saying,
where my kid's gonna go to school.
Thank you, Brian.
I don't disagree with that, and I think we need to make rentals a priority as we move forward. I guess from my perspective, I think who we were targeting were EMTs, teachers, custodians, people that do want to stay in this town, that do have families. I agree that this will not solve the problem for people that want to rent for 2 or 3 years while they're working as a cashier to get another job somewhere else or to move up the ladder. This South Roads is not going to support that. So I think particularly as we move forward with other options, there needs to be a definite focus on rental opportunities. But I also think, in theory, people living in Wakefield, in the Wakefield Elementary site, would then have a little bit better access to the places they might be working, like restaurants downtown or clerks at a store downtown. So the thought made some sense to put purchased residences for medium-income people in South Roads, potentially rentals in Wakefield Elementary. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
But
The
I-
Wakefield School is a good location for rentals because you don't need a car if you
Yeah.
work in town.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So you
it's
still-
very affordable. And that's what we're talking about, affordability.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, Josh has made this point regularly, you could also, in both locations, but especially Wakefield, you can link to mass transit pretty easily from there, I think, so that people could get to the hospital if there was an easy bus shuttle, or, could get even to URI if you had buses that were running regularly to URI. So you could work in those other large employee-based places pretty easily.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, good discussion all. I think we have a lot of things still to go through, so I'm going to propose we slide on to E3. And this, I think, we'll see. If it ends up being a really large sort of spirally discussion, we'll have to maybe prioritize a little bit what we want to keep and what we want to push on the agenda. But it's a discussion about the differences basically between the local, like the town inclusionary zoning versus the state comp permit process. We know from looking at some of the past documents from the town, looking at how many units we were expecting to make from different sort of mechanisms for generating affordable housing, that the inclusionary zoning for the town was expected to make, I think it was, at least a few hundred units over the coming decades, and it has been seldom used from what we hear from the planning department. So the purpose of the discussion is basically to say, why is this the case? And how can we make this more attractive for developers? Because it seems like, this is the town's opportunity to set out a process for building affordable housing on its terms. So how can the town basically balance the need and the community desire for building this housing, but not sacrifice things that it values? So I can give like a couple of basic pieces of information about each. Please, anybody who knows better, correct me if I am saying anything that is incomplete or wrong. But the basic idea is that for the town, it's going to impose for all projects that are of 6 or more units, and that aren't instead opting for the state level comp permit, there's a requirement of greater than or equal to 25% affordable units. If there would be a fractional amount, like let's say, for example, with exactly 6, you would try to get 25%, and it doesn't divide evenly, you'd have to round up to the next whole unit. And the idea is for every affordable unit that you build, you would get 2 additional market rate units that you can build to basically give you an incentive for building affordable by increasing your density. My understanding is that you still need to work within, at least to start before you get the density bonus, you still need to work within the town's framework for zoning. The big difference is, well, with the comp permit, that's essentially something that's going to apply to any community that doesn't meet the 10% affordable threshold laid out by the state. And so that basically will apply bonuses on a per acre basis, essentially, based on your affordability threshold. And that will, again, sort of supersede whatever town zoning there may be. If you have water and, just water, sewer, utilities to the site, you get a greater bonus than if you don't have that and you're having to rely on, say, septic. But ultimately, that's the idea. It's still a 25% threshold at the state level, though. So compared to the town, there's no clear win there. I think at least from my perspective, the biggest reason that the state level permit seems to be chosen is that you can get a better bonus with limited resistance and limited ability from the town to sort of slow up your development compared to the town process. I think I certainly have thoughts for ways we might want to tweak the town one. I'm curious, I love that we have Jamie and Joe here both. I'm curious if, in your experience, there's basically if there's a gap in what I'm saying about why people are choosing one versus the other, and also just what thoughts you might have for making it more attractive.
I was going to say, pick me. Two things quickly to add to the discussion that Josh laid out with regards to the 25% and the bonuses. One thing that I need to make you aware, and it's point 1 and point 2, under incentive zoning, when you undertake that, you have to put a deed restriction on your property for 99 years. So if you're a developer doing and with the 25%, there are kind of magic numbers. You want to build 8 units, 12 units, 16 units, because you don't want to build 6 because you still got to do the same amount of affordable, so you got to figure out how to do 8. You don't want to do 9 because you have to do the same amount as 12. So you're going to always do the math to get to a whole number if you can. Also with incentive zoning, you have to meet the parking standards. And you have to do 99 years. So if you're a multifamily rental builder and you're building a 40-unit development, you have to deed restrict your affordable units for 99 years. And you rent them at 80% AMI. And you have to follow all of the town's rules and regulations. And yes, you get a density bonus. Every affordable unit, you get to increase the density according to state law. If you do a comp permit, you have to supply 25% affordable. The statute lays out minimum density bonuses per acre. So if you're in an R200 zone, you may think you're going to get a bigger. It's actually What's a unique thing about the statute is it really disincentivizes, if you just look as the bonuses, of building in urbanized areas. Because if you have half an acre under the minimums in state law, you don't get a really big density bonus. But if you're out in an R80 zone and you got 50 acres, you get a really big density bonus. Mm-hmm. The other aspect is those are minimums in the law, Josh. And what the law allows them to do is not comply with zoning. Or it's not comply with zoning. Where they don't meet zoning compliance or the regulations, they can request a variation from that, a deviation from it. So if they're in an R20 zone, which is 1 house per 20,000 square feet, they can ask to do 8 homes on 20,000 square feet, and that is an adjustment to the zoning regulations. Under a comp permit, you're only required to submit 1 parking space per unit. You're also only obligated to do a 30-year deed restriction. So if I'm that 40-unit apartment complex builder, I can go inclusionary, where it's allowed in a zone, meet all the setbacks, do all the landscaping, do all the screening, meet the height restrictions, and then I get a small bonus, and I have to deed restrict for 99 years. Or I can comp permit, not have to comply with the zoning regulations, not be adherent to the density required in the zone, have to follow setbacks, lot coverage, height, landscaping, or parking, because I'm allowed to reduce to 1, and only deed restrict to 30 years. Which one are you picking if you're the developer? Are you going to wait an extra 69 years to be able to get them the market rate, or you're gonna wait just 30, and in year 31, you get to go full market rate. So there, and again, these are the cards we're dealt from state law. So I think potentially the only way to do it is you have to substantially incentivize the inclusionary zoning, but then every time you get an incentive zoning application, it's not gonna look like the zone it's in, because you're giving them a substantial density bonus to steer them towards compliance with the regulations. And then they're not gonna be able to fit the density bonus on the property.
Right, and it's
So
interesting
we're
because.
kind of on the carousel. We're just going around
Yes.
and around.
And what you've said, I think, when I was reading these, something that really jumped out to me is how the different bonuses are applied, right? So I love that you made the point about the comp permit sort of almost pushing you to build less in built-up areas because it's per acre that you get the bonus. So if you have more land, you can have more bonus to put into your project, basically. Whereas for the town IZ, it's per affordable unit. So if hypothetically, let's just say zoning didn't exist, you could make an infinitely tall skyscraper, you could get a triple height skyscraper out of that for building it with the town IZ. You couldn't do that with a comp permit.
Yes, you could.
So could you? Even if it's per acre?
No, because that's a minimum.
Oh, per minimum, I see. So they would have to request.
What the law set is kind of a baseline where a developer as of right gets that density bonus. But in my example, if you're in an R20 zone, in conventional development, how many houses can you build in an R20? We'll forget multifamily, 1, right? Under a comp permit allows you to deviate from the density. So you could propose 10 on that 1 acre. What the law said is you can't make them do, they have a right to at least this, but it doesn't say they only have a right to that.
So in practice, though, I'm curious. So is it just sort of like, this has to be hashed out legally if they want to go above that? Because I know the town has limited ability to sort of restrict what they can do. Like, how does that go?
And again, I've been involved in litigation before in another state with regards to comprehensive permits, and the outcome of those cases really fall on health, safety, public welfare. And it's not the probability that someone may get hurt or there's an assumption they may get hurt. There has to be a rational nexus to actual determined harm. So in your example, say the fire department had a ladder truck that could go only up to 3 floors, and someone came in and proposed a 6-story building. You would say, you can't go above 3 floors because we only have a ladder truck that goes 2, 3, and the developer says, I'm gonna sprinkle my building. And you say, well, but someone still could be in a window on the foot, and say, but can you guarantee that person gets harmed? My building's fully sprinklered. A judge may say, I understand the ladder truck goes to 3 stories, but that person on the 6th floor they meet all the building codes, they meet all the safety, there's refuse area, and the building's sprinkled. It meets all the standards of a 6-story building. And then, and again, once you get above a certain height, there aren't ladder trucks that reach that. So, ladder trucks don't go to the highest floors in Providence, right? Yet they still build them that high because they meet a standard. So how can you say, you can build that building in an urban setting where they still only have the ladder truck that reaches the 3rd or 4th floor, but you can't do it in a rural community that only reaches when they have the same building code, same standards. So it's a tough defense. I actually had scenarios where a judge was on a site. We were contemplating the fact that where a proposed driveway was, when a car was leaving and you looked left, you had limited sight line. When you looked right and you were to exit, you had limited sight line. We actually, in this case, had a judge who came out to the site, looked left and said, oh my God, you can't see. Looked right and said, you can't see. And when he left the site, he actually had us stand in the road to stop traffic so he could exit the property. He ruled in favor of the developer. Because the developer, there was a regulation that said you had to shoot sightline from the edge of the traveled way. And we were establishing the fact that's where the pavement stops. Well, the developer got smart with his engineer and proposed to paint a stripe 4 feet in on the pavement. And that is the new edge of traveled way. So you could actually enter the road for 4 feet, look left, look right, because you hadn't entered the travel way yet. And the judge said, okay. You know, so it's a pretty hard burden to pass. So, you know, and you're better off defining a regulatory realm versus trying to defend something on a health, safety, public welfare.
Sure.
It's hard.
No, that's good to know. So my initial reaction maybe wouldn't actually be a good solution. I was thinking that some combination of, for example, advancing the missing middle draft ordinance that we have been trying to shepherd over the line, basically having some sort of a sensible framework for increasing density, and then especially focusing on corridors where we think it makes sense to do more build out, like for example near like West Kingston, the 138, kind of near the station where we're already going to have that new transit investment, et cetera. You know, if you had a ability to just with Town IZ get increased per unit bonuses that would then play up in a more built up area, that sounds great. But from what you're saying, it seems like you can already basically do that on the comp permit. It would be very hard to throw out a project that tried to do that on the basis of safety or whatever other technicality.
And I think the difficulty is, you know, we see it with traffic a lot where people say, well, there's going to be increased traffic, therefore it's not safe. And it's like increased traffic doesn't always correspond with a safety issue. It's just increased traffic and it's potentially inconvenience. Does the probability change of an accident because there's more traffic? It does. But does it mean that the roadway is less safe? Doesn't mean it's less safe, it just changes the probability of an incident. It's still, if it's a safe road, it's still potentially a safe road. If it's an unsafe road, it's still an unsafe road. So again, those, you know, some of the efforts we are trying to do, we just signed a contract with Able City East. They're working on revisions to the form-based code. Brian's aware of this. To increase density on the Old Tower Hill Road corridor, and looked at form-based code and a more mixed-use urbanized type development there, going more dense, higher buildings, more place-making, streetscape interrelationship with the community and walkability. The state just released some grant funds for TODs, which are transit-oriented designs and districts. So we may explore putting a grant together for monies to study a few areas to see whether or not they are oriented towards TOD and increased development. You know, you look at the Amtrak station and, you know, everybody wants the MBTA to come to Providence, to Wickford, and then come into South Kingstown, and then on to Westerly, and then connect with Shoreline East into London. I worked for 30 years in southeastern Connecticut, well, not quite 30 years, but 20 years in southeastern Connecticut, trying to get the two states to work together to get from New London, connecting, you know, two state DOTs working together with a third state DOT, and transportation network is, you know, sometimes difficult. But again, it's a goal. It doesn't mean you shouldn't look at the goal. And if that was a goal, you have land available or the availability to redevelop land around the train station. You know, maybe not on the south side, but on the west side. You know, you have the Fairgrounds Road, you have a vacant turf fields, and then, you know, auto lumber at some point in time, they may not be in my lifetime, could be 20, 30 years from now, could be redeveloped as a TOD. We're seeing the Snyder property that was bought by NORPAC from New Jersey, exploring the ability to do residential there. They're doing that because of where it is, and also the train station plays a prominent role in that, as well as the University of Rhode Island, as well as to Mr. Smith's point that you need some rentals in this area that are affordable, and they would have to do 25% there for our citizens and our businesses.
So, yeah, I would just add that, so the comprehensive permit obviously really ties the hands of the local planning board for a couple of reasons, but one of the main reasons is that typically on a conventional subdivision, there's findings that the town has to make, there's findings that the planning board has to make in order to approve it. The comprehensive kind of flips that around. If the town doesn't have 10% affordable, you pretty much have to approve it unless there's certain findings that you make to disapprove. And those findings, as Jamie said, is really whether it be harm to safety or the environment. Both of those things are really come out of our hands. So the two things that you could actually disapprove it for is basically two things you don't really have a plan. The environmental is pretty much regulated by the state. So we can't find that, well, you can't do it because it would be unsafe for drainage. Well, guess what? In order for the drainage, they're going to have to go through DEM. And if DEM says it's approved, it's approved. And so the local planning board doesn't necessarily have the engineering expertise, or certainly the judge is not going to look at the planning board as has the expertise as DEM. And the same thing, whether it be wetlands or other environmental issues. So that kind of, one thing that we could find to disapprove is kind of taken out of our hands. And then the other thing is safety. And again, if any development is going to come in with a professional engineer, and they're going to have, the engineering that says this is safe. So again, that makes it very difficult to say, well, no, we're going to disprove it when it's safety, when the developer is the one with the professional engineer who's pretty much taking liability for it. So it really takes it out of our hands. I would like to think that with the changes where in the past, the state did not give any guidance relative to what the increased density minimum that you would have to allow. It was just pretty much unstated. Now they have that specifically written down. So if it's a lot that doesn't have any infrastructure and you're doing 25%, you can get 3 additional. If it's a lot that has infrastructure, you get 5%. I would like to think that the fact that they give those guidelines gives us a little bit more wiggle room. But again, it is difficult. Typically, and because of that reason, typically the focus on a comp permit from the plan board's perspective is what is going to be the harm that's going to be presented, and let us address, even though we approve it because we're kind of backed into that, we have to approve, let us address all those issues that could affect the community or the neighborhood with conditions of approval. So typically you'll see on a lot of our past decisions, even those things that it's obviously the community didn't necessarily like and the planning board probably didn't like, it was approved, but it was approved with conditions of approval that would try to mitigate as many impacts as possible. So that becomes the focus.
Does it make any sense to consider the inclusionary zoning then? I mean, is it worth anything?
No, it is, because there are some developments who, we just had one on Broad Rock Road where the developer didn't want to do a comprehensive permit. He could meet 99% of the regulatory requirements in that scenario, because we use the term wasn't trying to overburden the density on this property, decided to do the incentive zoning. So if we took that away, he wouldn't have to do any affordable units. With that in place, we did get some affordable units out of that. I think he's working with hopefully working with a nonprofit to potentially bring those to the table as part of that development scenario. So again, I would not recommend you remove it. I think, one of the things we asked for funding, and the town council has been really good with the planning department about giving us either the staffing or the financial resources to do projects like the village regulations, to work on Old Tower Hill Road. And we do have funds to do a modernization of our zoning code. and bring it, out of the 60s and 70s and make it more graphic related. And also, I mean, Jay, Brian, and I spend a lot of time every single day, if not at least weekly, having to reread our zoning code because things are hidden all over the place. And we kind of have to remember that, oh yes, it says this here, but 10 pages later, it kind of contradicts it and sends you in another direction. We mentally have to know all of these. If, 3 of us left, someone would be sitting there and they'd read one code and not realize 10 pages, 20 pages later, it says something slightly different. So we're going to try and eliminate that. And when we do that, we'll try and simplify things and also give direction. The village regulations, cottage regulations, sorry, it just expired in March. The planning board just talked the other night to put that on a work agenda to get those back on the books. Even if a developer doesn't utilize those, having those into regulations is a tool for the planning department. When we talk with a developer about a comprehensive permit, sometimes we're having, hey, what does the town want? Well, we've got these cottage regulations. You don't quite fit the box for them. But if you could do your development to adhere to this kind of style of development, it may be viewed more positively than if you just, pushed in 20 houses that all look the same and don't have any sense of place or community building or placemaking. We're trying to push the developers into not just building houses, but building small communities within an existing fabric of a community. You're not just building houses. You're extending the fabric of a community that exists. Can you try and blend in with that and become an attribute to it until a detriment of it? So.
Gotcha. So I think the one thing I wanted to then ask, hopefully as more of a concluding thought, of course, if folks have more thoughts, please bring them up. But basically, if we're thinking that the town IZ is more of like a fail-safe to scoop up maybe a couple of extra affordable units in the event where a developer doesn't really want to go through the process of a comp permit, but we still have this frustration from the planning board that they can't really affect the process very much. They seem like their hands are tied about what can be built and where. Well, we also share the state's goal to want to build more affordable housing, and that's the purpose of the comp permit. My assumption, and I would love to get thoughts on this, is that the best way to do this is through, as you're saying, basically a change to the zoning code, like modernization of that. Whereas instead of having to go through this special application and put together your own proposal and everything, these sorts of structures are already allowed in more zones. So whether that's picking particular corridors, like maybe it's Old Tower Hill Road, or maybe again it's 138 West Kingston, where you want to see more density, and making it something that by town zoning you don't need to get special waivers for. You don't need to go crazy with that. You were just allowed per the town regulations to do that. My guess is that would be a path of least resistance compared to a comp permit, because even then they would still have to abide by whatever whatever minimums for affordables, but it would in theory limit a whole bunch of friction and meetings and approvals. I'm curious, and cost thereby, exactly. And so I'm curious if you would both agree with that functionally, if that's sort of the best way to meet both goals, or if there's a flaw in that thinking.
It's a different way of thinking that hasn't been traditional since Euclidean zoning was adopted. And if everybody understands Euclidean zoning, it's how Euclid versus Ambler, separation of uses, residential goes where residential goes, industrial, and it's pyramidal shape. There have been hybrids of that in the 80s and 90s. Lane Kent Diggs performance zoning. You had Andal Rarent doing cluster development and more variations of a traditional subdivision. And I think an outshoot of that in the late 90s, early 2000s was form-based code. And the towns dipping their toe in the water with the form-based code for Old Tower Hill Road, where it looks less about the separation of uses and more about the built environment and how the built environment interacts with a resident every day. and tries to make that as harmony between those two, and blends that. There is a potential that we're very successful with the form-based code. It's received very well. And then you kind of have two options. Do you look at form-based for the whole town, or do you do it incrementally? And maybe you go into Peacedale and develop a form-based code for Peacedale. And then you look at a corridor on 108 and you say, hey, this is going to be a form-based commercial strip development zone where we're going to approve the interrelationship of the boxes and the pedestrian connections. We're going to have some architectural standards, but pretty much you can do things as of right, and there's oversight by a planning board, but there's less discretion because we've already predetermined what the product is going to be, and it's articulated in the regulations. And in my 30-plus years of planning, most of the developers always are concerned about certainty. That in Connecticut, especially versus Rhode Island, because in Connecticut, if you're doing a 20-lot subdivision or a 20-lot apartment building, you are fully designing that. Stormwater, drainage, traffic, architecture, building, footprint, everything before you apply. In Rhode Island, it's a 3-step process. You can add a 4th if you do the pre-app. But you can literally show rectangles on the box, and Joe will attest to this, with no drainage, with no parking lot, really, other than it's going to be over here. We see plans where, where's your storm drainage going? And there's a circle. Here, see, it says future storm drainage. And under Rhode Island law, that's called a master plan. You can't ask for drainage at master plan. You can't ask for how you're going to regrade the property. You can't ask for environmental impact. Oh, that's at the next step of development. If you go, so it's a long process, but there's also some uncertainty at the end because it keeps getting modified during every step. Form-based code could modify that by saying you can come in kind of one-stop shopping. We already know what a predetermined product is supposed to be and how it's supposed to sit on the property, and that allows someone with some certainty, and potentially if they can save time, they can save cost, and they have certainty on the backside of it. But again, this is new to a lot of New England states, but you see a lot of places moving to that more prescriptive, predetermined outcome versus not knowing what we're going to get, and it's case by case, piece by piece.
So my feeling on inclusionary zoning versus comprehensive permit, and I've expressed this before, is I do believe that we should look at our inclusionary and look at how do we make that a better option for the developer than the comprehensive, and also better for the town. So I am an advocate for affordable housing, obviously. I have been for a long time, as well. That's why I'm on this board. But I do believe that the comprehensive permit is a very broad brush, meant to do good, but there's a lot of things that are not so great about it, right? So when you look at one of the things that's in for affordable housing is that it has to be compatible in size and architectural standards, et cetera. That in itself, I think, could use some, maybe we could do better on. So I am an advocate when you look at a development going in with ranches and raised ranches and having those affordable units basically be the same. Got it. But when you get maybe a development that's over near the ocean, that the market rates are $2 million houses, $1.5 million houses, and now that developer has to sell one for $300,000, somebody is gaining a lot more than maybe they should. And so I'm an advocate for affordable housing, but when you get to the point where that person is getting a much nicer house than somebody that's working, and a family that's working, and then some of that luster goes away from me. Having the options where maybe the developer, instead of building another $1.5 million house that he has to sell for $350,000, maybe, and instead of doing a 4 or 5 bedroom house, he gets to do a duplex with a couple it becomes more feasible for him, and the town ends up with even more units than they would otherwise. So I do believe that there is room to improve our inclusionary that could possibly be a win-win, which would be of interest for the developer, but still would get the towns, maybe meet their objectives a little bit better. So,
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I think if it would work for everybody, I would love to discuss this a bit more, but I know we're already at about 9, so I would propose we maybe hold off on more discussion on this tonight and keep moving along. So the next item on the list was this is item 4, section E, discussion of the CHLTRI 2023 deed restricted housing study. I don't think this will take too long. I don't know if people had large amounts of thoughts on this. I had a couple things I thought were interesting, but yeah, I'll open to the floor first. Yeah, I guess if nobody has initial thoughts, and please cut across me if you do, I can just say a couple things first. I did think it was interesting, the maps on, I guess, page 73 and 74 of our packet, I think maybe page 3 and 4 of the actual document, showing where the affordable ownership units are versus the rentals. Like, it seemed very segmented by town, where you'd have some that are almost entirely rentals and some that are almost entirely ownership. I don't know exactly why it worked out like that in their portfolio, but I did think it was interesting to look at. Another, I think probably the thing that jumped out at me the most actually was 2 pages after that, talking about basically the actual AMIs of the people living in houses of a certain, basically AMI restriction, right? Showing that the median income for people is actually way below the cap for each given type. And their stock of affordable homes, actually very much like South Kingstown, has a lot at, or like comparative a large amount at 80%, comparatively large amount at 120, and very little in between at 100. And so you see that show up in the AMIs of people in the 120% units, because there's nothing else below that until 80. And so the median income was about 80% AMI for the people living in the 120s, even though that was very similar to the median income for the people living in the 100s. So it seems like, you know, having a little bit more coverage in the middle could be good. Like, maybe sometimes, like, if we have the opportunity to say, instead of build some 80s and some 120s, maybe build double the amount of hundreds, maybe that could help smooth things out a little bit without adding cost, like something like that. Yeah, and I think that was most of the important stuff for me to say. I don't know if anybody else had thoughts on it.
I will say that median income to the affordable point really caught my eye, and I mean, I made that comment earlier as well. To me, it represents, I think, a big reality that isn't well understood when people go to buy homes, that the stretch is much bigger than it looks on paper, and the likelihood of failure is that much higher when it comes to losing the house or managing the mortgage, or, you know, not getting late on your payments. The other thing I think it leads to, which is to your point, there was an interesting, I read in the Proja, I want to say it was maybe a week ago, there was an interesting article written in on the section where readers always write in, I forget what it's called, but I think it's Your Turn or something like that. And it was an individual who works, I think he works for the state, but he's in the middle, he's stuck in the middle, and about to be, as he sees it, driven out of his rental property with nowhere to go, and no good resolution at a state level about they want to stay living in Providence and work there because that's where they work, and but their income level is at the point that there aren't any places to rent or buy with what they're making, And it is that missing middle component, and it just kind of hit home with me, like, oh, yeah, I mean, here's a individual, they've got a great job, their income isn't fixed at this point, but they're, and the article almost read like he's about to be homeless, living out of his car. And he's making a good wage, but just not enough to pay the bill, to buy a place or to rent a place.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
Rich, your point, and some states struggle with this, is, everyone is always working harder, or trying to work harder, trying to improve, most people trying to improve themselves, do a little more, get a little more, or, you have a good job, or you move jobs and you get an income increase, yet it may be a detriment to that. Some models of affordability in the country go more on throw in a little bit of kind of rent control mindset, that if you start to rent an affordable unit, it's based on your income on the day you started to rent it. It's not done on an annual basis. So if you're a young nurse and you're in a nice community and you're renting, and you're an RN and then you become an LPN, and you just got a little bump in pay, well, you really didn't, because you just lost your rental assistance in essence. And now you may not even be able to afford in the community. So again, some communities have looked at, it's the day you get in, almost to the purchase. Because again, if you were buying a unit, it's the income the day you buy it. Like, so you could be a medical student when you buy the home, and a doctor a year later, but you don't have to sell your home. But if he was a renter, he has to leave, or she has to leave. So again, I understand the dynamics of it, and I've read a lot of articles on that fact, that people are in, and then next thing you know, they're out. So maybe there's a percentage increase that you're allowed to do versus you're single and then you have a partner and you're dual income, then it's a different story. But I think if you get a 2% raise, you shouldn't necessarily be ineligible for the home you've been in for the last 5 years because you got a 2% raise 1 year.
Awesome. Yeah, those are all good thoughts. I thought that was interesting to look at. But I'll propose that we continue sliding along again. I know I want to respect people's time. So item E5 is about the proposed EDC employment survey, and there is an update to be given by Ms. Mittendorf. So I will open the floor to that.
I will turn on my mic. I did attend the EDC meeting and got copies of the survey. My question is, can I share them? It was a public meeting. This was a document that, I kind of got approval. I made copies. This is a rough draft. I don't even know if it's been sent out, but the point was, they were trying to get a handle on employees at University of Rhode Island and South County Hospital, and really very, I think I have enough copies. I'm not sure if I do. Hold on a sec.
Just so you're aware, Susan, if they handed that out at a public meeting, that's a public document. So
Yeah.
you are within your rights to distribute
Okay.
that.
I think I have enough. So very general, and the intent is, again, can people that live in this community and work in this community afford to live here? And I think specifically, maybe speaking to, I don't have enough copies, sorry. Maybe more rental, but if the intent, if you look at it, the survey intends to leverage the two largest employers in Rhode Island as a sample size and determine the demand of workforce housing in town, the hurdles preventing people, employees in South County from living here. Really, they were gathering the data around, where do you work and again, trying to accomplish the result of the survey is really to determine the significant need for workforce housing. So if you'll see the questions are really, where do you live? Do you rent? Do you own? How many people reside with you? Even asking income levels and, commute times. And if you would you live in South Kingstown, if you could? And what are the reasons preventing you from? So, again, I'm not going to go every question. So I actually need to probably check back to see the status. I don't think at this point they had gone forward with the distribution, or, I did indicate that certainly this committee would be very interested in the results, and they said they would certainly share it. But I'm not sure how far it went, other than they've put this together and it's kind of been approved, but I'm not sure that it's been passed out.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the
Yeah,
update.
yeah.
It sounds like it'll be very interesting
And
to see.
I'll continue to follow up. I don't even think it's gone forward to, I think they've just completed this. This is the working document, and I don't think they've,
Does EDC need approval from town council to distribute surveys like this to the communities, or, because it maybe,
That's under discussion.
oh, okay.
I'm just looking at this. They're doing this survey, and they want to extrapolate it to what they believe is a sample for the town, but they're only going to 2 employees? That is, you can't go to 2 employees and then extrapolate it to the town.
Oh, but they
If
went
you're
to
gonna
the
do
two,
a
they went to the 2 largest.
Two largest.
That business and how they treat their employees is not representative of what South Kingston is. Anybody that does any type of sampling would say that you have to do basically random sampling, go into all different businesses. South County Hospital may, in general, pay a lot more than what the average business in Rhode Island is. South Kingston may have a different type of, the hospital, a different type of employee than what Dunkin' Donuts does. I would be very surprised if any university or any professor would tell you that this is any type of valid survey. If you want, it's a valid survey for what those 2 businesses are doing, maybe, but it's not a valid survey for South Kingstown.
Yeah.
You can't treat
And again, we
South County Hospital employee the same way with the questions about income and educational level as you do as Dunkin' Donuts employee.
We can look for clarity from EDC. I'm not sure they intended to extrapolate to the entire community, or or the end result is to find out what those 2 larger employees were looking for and what their needs were. Because again, probably after them, one of the larger employees is the school system and or the town.
But just look their overview. This survey intends to leverage the 2 largest employers, South Kingstown, all right, so the students, as a sample size to determine the demand of the workforce housing in the town and hurdles preventing people employed in South Kingstown from living here.
We'll clarify that, Joe.
yeah, so
Considering.
that would, but the intent of me attending this meeting was to get information on the survey that was proposed, and this was the copy. And I really don't think it has gone forward, nor has it got any traction at all. And you're correct, they were talking about different types of employee, the people that work at Dunkin' Donuts and the people, you're correct, it's not really giving us a sampling of the people that work in the town.
My recommendation is that they should go to, if it's the EDC,
Yeah.
that they should reach out to somebody at the university that is involved in surveys, that teaches that stuff, and tell them, and maybe they get a better idea how to get it. So you get valid samples to meet whatever their objective is.
Good idea.
That's good advice.
Awesome. Well, good thoughts. I agree with the point, Joe. I think it would be good to feel more confident if they're trying to really extrapolate out to the town that the sample is representative of the town. So that's good. Okay, let's jump forward to item 6. I guess I don't know exactly where this is going to go and how much needs to be said. If someone in particular was trying to champion discussing the RI Commerce grant application process, I guess maybe you can give thoughts about whether it makes sense to table or whether it makes sense to go through now.
Josh, I can try and summarize it in a few sentences.
Sounds lovely. Let's do it.
So just with regards to the Rhode Island Commerce Grant, we get bulletins from the state and or federal government about grant opportunities. Sometimes we have months to reply, sometimes they're internal to the town and they get to the right people, and next thing you know, we find out we have, by Friday, 4 o'clock to get something done. This was a simple grant that came out of Rhode Island Commerce. They were looking for projects that could potentially move forward, that were getting closer to shovel ready. Did you have a project ready to go? Would it initiate the advancement of affordable housing? And kind of, between the town manager's office and the planning department, it's like, a bell went off and said, well, wait a minute, we have 2 schools, we're looking to tear down both those schools, we're looking to advance affordable housing on both those projects. I contacted Mr. Manny and said, we have a rough estimate of about $500,000 to tear down the school. If I submitted a grant for $500,000, could I match it with $100,000 of town funds? Can I apply for a $600,000 grant? We get it, great. We don't, no harm, no foul. Go ahead, Jamie, put a grant together, just get it out by the time frame. There was a question of where's the $100,000 come from? Sometimes we send the grants out that we're gonna apply for these, and if someone's gonna give us $500,000 for free, we're gonna figure out where the $100,000 comes from. The town does have a contingency fund for just this purpose to allow us to apply for grants. We have, I don't want to say a dollar amount, but there's more than 6 figures in that dollar amount to be ready and available for matching funds. So, you don't have to go back and ask where all the funds are. Or in essence, you don't have to go back and ask the taxpayer that, hey, we got this $1 million, it was a 10% match, we need $100,000, it's not in the budget. It's already built into the budget. I think there was some concern that it's coming from the housing fund. The housing fund is a town fund. It's controlled by the council. You can advise and influence potentially how that money is spent, but it is a town resource. It is controlled by the council. Through the town manager's office, we applied. The matching funds were available. We did not earmark any of the housing funds as match. Could they be used if we are successful in the grant process? There's a possibility of that, but we do not know that. So for someone to go from A to Z quickly to say those are the housing funds, that was not the case. In fact, that we have more resources outside of that fund for matching grants. So we do this often. I applied for $350,000 for Main Street. We had matching funds available, so we committed those in our grant application. They're not committed unless we receive it.
So do we know where they are in the review cycle and when we might get some indication of a yes or no?
I don't have a yes or a no yet, and I'm not sure of the time frame. Again, we just get random emails, you've been selected.
Okay.
So, so again, we have a number of grants out there and earmarks out there. We try and stay abreast of them, but I don't have any definitive dates for you, Richard.
Because it does have a play in the RFQ as well,
yes.
right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and again, we will, the town manager, I don't want to use the term aggressively, but, has asked department heads we'll use the term aggressively go after grants where grants are warranted. if the money's out there, if we can get it, let's try and get it and be proactive. So. Does anyone have any questions on how we did that? Okay.
Awesome. That was very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, and let's continue sliding along. Last item of new business, discussion of the May Town Council meeting. Of course, having missed the last meeting, my memory is getting increasingly hazy for this, but I know we had met beforehand to discuss the statement that that basically Richard prepared and that we had made modifications to. I guess I'll open it up to see if any folks had thoughts, impressions from that, or any sort of follow-ups we might take from it.
So this was the meeting where we met to draft the letter that was then presented
Exactly.
to the town council. And as we talked about earlier, I felt like some of the things we had talked about in the letter were actually included in the future, in the RFP as it was developed. Now, this group might have wanted more, and we've discussed that tonight, but I felt like it moved forward. So I feel like that intent of that meeting was helpful and fruitful. Appreciate it. I think, back to the last topic, that particular piece was, I think, a matter of poor timing and some communication issues, and it's behind us, and move on, is my take. But I thought that meeting was productive, and I thought the result has been productive.
Yeah, I would say the same. My, being new to this committee, my one concern is not really, still trying to understand how we interact with the town council, and being a couple of days away from July and still not having had a work session with them for the year in terms of objectives to focus on this year is a little concerning to me. And when we raised that point, I felt it just fell on deaf ears. Now, I don't know if other committees are in the same situation as we are, and it's just a capacity issue with town council, but, and I suspect that is the case, but it is concerning to me that we're all, as volunteers and representatives on different committees, trying to put a good faith effort forward to help the town do things we believe is good for the town, but our town council is having difficulty finding that 30 minutes to have a dialogue with us. So that's all I have to say.
And I just would like to say, I think Rich, you spoke the items. I think there was some indication that maybe we weren't being heard, but after looking at what has accomplished, what we've talked about tonight, the RFP, seems to like we're going in the right direction. But I'm not 100%, being new, are we on the right track? Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? What is our role? Understanding it is communicating the mission, I guess, of affordable housing far and wide, but also I think there is a missing link between us and the town council.
I can say this to add to the discussion that, Brian has been assigned to you over a few years since I've been here, and we literally, after meetings, whether it's EDC, Affordable Housing, Conservation Commission, we have informal debriefs. I ask Brian after every EDC meeting or every affordable housing meeting, what happened last night? What do I need to know about? What are the hot topic issues? What are the button issues? What is a priority? What is potentially, is there anything we need to address immediately so we understand what it is? Something, it's not a snowball starting at the top of the hill that by the time it gets to the bottom, it's a little bit bigger than a small little pebble. It can actually run somebody over and cause some harm. And so you may not always be getting before council, but at the staff level, I want to say at a department level, we're hearing what you're saying, and we're, your letter may not have been formally discussed at the council, but I have it, our department has it, we've discussed it internally, and we're trying to tick off that low-hanging fruit that we know we can put into things and move them forward without, causing a significant amount of discussion or anxiety on anyone's behalf, because it's very low-hanging fruit and they're good suggestions and we can just implement them. And you've seen some of those insertions into the RFP without, making a right-hand turn at 90 degrees in the RFP because one person made a comment. And some of the things we struggle with, and we do it with the planning board, Joe, so I'm not throwing you under the bus, but a lot of times there's a comment from one, but it is the consensus of the group. So because you may be at a meeting said, I said something and no one heard it, yes, you or two of you may have said something, but unless you make that formal or it's consensus of the group, it's a conversation that was had. It isn't a directive or something affirmative you want to move forward. So it's something, Joe says it often about missing middle. When are we going to address missing middle? and everybody nods, but there's no true consensus to move that missing middle forward at the planning board at this moment. And Joe quietly every couple of months brings it back up. But again, it's one voice. It's not a consensus or a motion to move something forward. So again, I have 6 pages of notes, and if you went into my office, I have notes and notes and notes, and it drives Lynn Smith crazy. And every so often, she comes in my office and puts them in binders. Now I have binders full of notes. But again, I do look at these, I do read the meeting minutes, I do try and stay abreast of it, what happens. I have a significant night meeting. I've always tried to stay abreast, and I like to think that I try and stop by boards and commissions or be familiar with the chair people and speak to them. And Josh has been at other town council meetings and planning board meetings, so we've seen him there. I've been at meetings with Bethany, not Bethany, but Megan before, had limited interaction with Bethany because she wasn't the chair for very long. But we hear you, but the key is if you want to make a point, make it as a group, not as one point amongst 6 members at a meeting. Because that's just a discussion at a meeting. It's not consensus of a committee to try and bring something forward.
So that was the intent of the letter that we delivered on.
No, and that's exactly
the 12th.
to my point. That was a discussion that ended up to be vetted bullet points.
Right.
I think Brian and discussions on the crafting of that letter was trying to find some middle ground so you could make your point clearly to a council based knowing what their initiative was. Remember, I said we have many masters. We're trying to disseminate all of this information so that ideas can move forward in a timely manner in a program. And we're okay putting stuff forward that may push against a program.
So I guess I have a question. Do we work for you or do we work for the town council?
You are advisory to the town council. We
Okay.
are providing guidance to you, that's all.
Okay. So that's a little bit where my
Yeah.
confusion lies, because it feels like, and again, it's my short time on this committee and in what I'll call politics, town politics, that our ability to communicate with the town council is minimized. And I'm not saying that from any person or process or thing, it just feels, and I recognize town council's got a lot on their plate to manage a town of this size. Absolutely 100% recognize that. But I also know if you want a productive workforce, you have to at some point have a conversation and the communication and the two-way dialogue with them to make sure you're on the same page. And that's my confusion is, I recognize, again, lots of work on the town council, but there should be some sense of priority that the committees and the town council are aligned on the goals and objectives in the 12-month cycle that we're working on. And it's already half over. So, yeah, that's not pointed at you, it's
No.
just, it's what it is.
No, I understand, and you're not alone as an affordable housing collaborative. Planning board got pushed off, BPAC has gotten pushed off, COMCOM. It's just managing the workload of the town council. A couple council members even discussed the other night that, for some matters that are pressing, we may have to have very poignant meetings with specific subject matter just so we can be more efficient at our regularly scheduled meetings. So, but again, I want to say that, Brian's hearing you, he's heard you, he communicates with me, I communicate with the town manager. So we're trying to understand where you're coming from as a collaborative and where the council's coming from and slowly implement some of your thoughts. But again, to Peter's point, the letter, was well articulated of the consensus of the committee, not consensus of individuals.
Right.
So,
And
and
I guess
thank you for working on that.
I mean, just very briefly, I do feel like what you described a minute ago is a little bit like the game of telephone. Everybody interprets it, those 3 or 4 steps to get from us to the town council. Right. I'm sure you guys are well-intended, but everyone puts it through their own filter. So the ability to dialogue directly with them, A, is more direct and therefore will be clearer, and B, will show them that we are in consensus on many of these points. And I think that in itself is an important function of that annual meeting between this committee and the board. And we would all implore you to say, whoever we need to say, let's try to make that happen as soon as we can. Anyway.
And we have talked internally about, is there a better mechanism for, I've worked for agencies before, larger metropolitan planning organizations where, we've done summits, we've done retreats, we've done Saturday sessions with breakfast and then pizza and, but I'm constantly reminded there's only 52 Saturdays in a year and, nights are precious, but, so we are hearing you, and it's not just you. We are hearing it from other boards and commissions, so please be patient, and we're working on it. I wish I had a better response, like, well, we're having a retreat this fall, and it's going to be on a Saturday, and here we are. So, but.
Awesome. Any last thoughts on that, or shall we slide forward?
Your advisory to the planning board and your advisory to town council, use both. I mean, being on the planning board, I would love to see you come to us with whatever the thoughts and proposals are, but if you don't feel like you're getting on the planning board, then go directly to the town council. But, I mean, you're advisory to both,
Yeah, I think I appreciate that, and that's a good point. I think the one other thing I'm wondering now, just occurring to me, so in terms of these low-hanging fruit sort of things, like obviously we've established that crafting like an actual written document that we vote on is one way to put it on the record that we are behind this. Let's I'm trying to see where's the line for that? Like, let's say hypothetically tonight there was a message we really wanted to all send. Like, could we just even verbally communicate something and all say we want to put this in the record as the opinion of the whole AHC, and provided that is voted, with unanimous consent that should go into the record, is that enough? Or do you think that a letter is a good mechanism for doing that? Like, does it have to be directed to the TC? I just want to see what's the best way of communicating our thoughts?
Meeting minutes are intended to be a record of what occurred. It's it's not a transcript, it's, item, discussion, general topic. I think if you want something to be a clear, definitive position, you should either do that, as the chair, and we could talk about this more, that, we talked about X, Y, and Z tonight. I want to be clear that there is consensus on the following 3 items. That's that's putting your toe in the water and understanding that, there appears to be consensus. You don't necessarily have to vote but it gives someone an opportunity to say, no, I don't think there's consensus, I don't agree with you tonight. I agree on points 1 and 2, but not 3. And then maybe you decide, well, there's consensus on 2, and 3 we're gonna let go right now, or we're gonna talk about at another meeting, and maybe we can build consensus for the 3rd item. The meeting minutes would then reflect that there was consent, you know, you could ask, please make it clear that there was consensus on 1, 2, and 3.
But you can always formalize it.
Yeah, to make it more
You can
formal.
always formally say, you know, I want to do a motion that this board finds a consensus, that the minutes shall reflect, you know, we had consensus on this, and then take a vote on it. And that's gonna be as formal as possible, so.
Yeah,
If you really want to make it formal, that this is exactly what we meant, and we want it to be in the record,
And-
that
and
may be
then-
the way to do it.
yeah. You know, so that's kind of the conservative way to do it. If you're gonna do a motion, then it sets a definitive action that the committee took at a meeting. You voted to support the following, and it was unanimous, right? It wasn't just consensus, you voted, and it was 6-0 in favor of the 3 points you wanted to make or pursue. And then you could say, and in addition to that, we want the chair to draft a letter and make the council, make the planning director or whomever, it could be the planning board, the planning director, the town manager, aware that at our meeting, we voted on the following 3 points that we would like to see in the RFP. You know, I think I have consensus of some items you'd like to see in there. It wasn't a vote, I'm gonna take them and see how I can put them in there, or intertwine them in a discussion with the town manager and the council. And again, I have a pecking order. I don't go straight to council. I go to my town manager. Town manager then determines what goes to council. So there is an order of things. But again, consensus, you know, there's discussion, and some people, you know, come back a month later and say, I said at this meeting, how come we're not doing it? And it's like, yes, you said at this meeting, but it wasn't a consensus or a vote of the committee. So discussion, consensus, formal vote, vote to letter, and then letter with follow-up or attendance at a meeting.
And that would also provide a good way of documenting any dissent, you know, so you could say 5 of the 6 members has consensus on this, one person feels strongly that's not the case with the following reasons, so.
That's how we did on ABC, that's the way we
Yeah.
described it. And we
Yeah.
go to Brian, and he would, if it was all legal, bring it back to the committee.
Right.
And everybody would vote on the letter. Are we sending this forward?
And it's similar to what you did on the last time, where I think the chair was directed to draft a letter. The letter came to staff. It was a little bit different than what may have been portrayed as the 4 or 5 items. Brian tried to put them back into task. Peter, you were writing an independent one based on your take, and ultimately there was consensus and then a vote that what your letter represented was what the thoughts of the committee represented. We're just trying to hear everything you're saying and get the consensus into the letter of the entire committee, not individuals or on the committee. You know, so if there's pushback from us, it's not really pushback. It's guardrails right and left to say we're trying to just keep you in there. And we're perfectly okay if you disagree with us. You know, never fear disagreeing with me or Brian or any staff who's here at a meeting. It's okay to articulate your points of views. We're just articulating to you what our professional experience is. And I want to say no one's right, no one's wrong. History will tell us who's right and wrong, or who made a proper decision or an incorrect decision. You know, if I knew what was right and wrong, I'd be a millionaire and would have bought, you know, Apple stock and Facebook and a whole bunch of other things, but I don't have a crystal ball.
Awesome. I think that's helpful. It seems like, you know, maybe depending on the urgency or the amount we want to insist upon it, we can sort of take different tacks. But the other thing I was wondering, so Amy, have you been putting together minutes, or has that still mostly been Brian? That's you now? Okay, cool. So that at least feels like then you would be the one maybe that we can point to. If we're just trying to just say, make sure this is in there as a consensus, we can make sure that, like, you know, we highlight that for you. Okay, that's good, that's good.
Right, not to.
For sure. Awesome, awesome. Okay, well, that was helpful. I would propose we continue sliding along again. We're quite a bit over. There's nothing on old business, so there was just one staff update in G on the LMI development project status for Holly Street, Village at Broad Rock, SC Commons, Fieldstone Farm, Kelly Way, Fairgrounds Road, etc. It says. So I guess if there are any salient
I'll try
updates
and
on
do
these.
that. Broad Rock was approved. They're preparing their final plans for recording. That's 19 lots, 3 affordable. We're working with a potential developer of that site. South County Commons was approved. They have supplied draft plans in preparation of final. Those plans are somewhat different than the plans that were approved by the planning board, so we need to work with the developer on that. What was your other one, Josh?
Fieldstone Farms.
Fieldstone was approved so they'll be preparing final plans and recording. So
Do you know the sort of the numbers off the top of your head of,
Broad Rock was
number units?
19, South Road was 100, and South County Commons, was 104, 52 in one building and 52 in another building. And Fieldstone was, I want to say
36.
39.
That's the total number of units, so you're
Yeah.
looking at 25%, 20%
Yes.
on that first one.
Yep.
That's true, so you said Broad Rock was 19?
19.
Three had 3?
With 3 of, they did incentive. So remember, incentive is based on a lower number, and then they get the bonus, and the bonus are market rates. So there you don't end up with 25%. When you do the incentivized zoning, you end up with about 18 or 19, depending on the number. 18 to 19% versus 25. Comp permit, you get a straight 25.
And Holly Street's being constructed.
Holly Street's under construction. So you're seeing the northernmost unit go in. I think there's one affordable in that northern unit.
And was that comprehensive or?
That was as of right with incentive. That wasn't a comp permit.
All right. I'm on Kelly Way.
Kelly Way, how many affordable?
No, total.
I think Kelly Way's plus or minus 20, and then a component of that affordable. That was approved long before I was here 5 years. That project's been around for a while.
Kelly Way, where's
Kelly Way next to the Mazda dealer, but
Oh,
between Meadowbrook,
yeah.
Oh, right, yeah, okay.
behind the credit union.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
That's a place, yeah, okay.
so Mr. Holbrook's developing that.
Okay, well, appreciate the update. It looks like there are no recurring discussion topics on the agenda, and also no new discussion and future agenda items.
So
I guess we
have
could discuss what we might want to add.
One new discussion, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's just administrative. It seems like there's been some difficulty getting audio meeting recordings posted to the town website. I've been working with Brian. He was looking at that. He said normally, I guess it goes out to a contract service and they take care of it, but it's kind of like they're, if I'm paraphrasing Brian, it's like when they get around to it, they get around to it, and it could take a while, and I feel like that's a problem. And I feel like there's stuff missing that the public may want to go look at, and they can't because those things aren't available on the town website.
So we were somewhat dependent on a third party
Yeah.
on posting it. Like when we posted an agenda, we would have to send it to someone to post. And then they would actually have to format it. So we found on occasion dates were changed, things were changed. So if we sent them a PDF, they would say, please send us a Word doc. And we want to be the keeper of the information. So really when we send it to someone, it should be protected and you can't change it. So if there's an error, it's our error. We're kind of in a transitional period. If you notice, your agenda formats have changed, where you have the sidebar on the left. Hopefully you'll get used to that and like that, where you just look at the agenda item and the things that are attached are right there on the left-hand side. We're working on the recording part of that, but we're trying to bring all of that, in essence, in-house, so individual departments and or boards and commission staff are responsible to be able to post it, so it's our error, our mistake, and we can do it in a more timely manner. So please bear with us. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
This is a good time for me to just sort of let the committee know that I did ask Brian recently if he would be able to send out the minutes, the draft minutes, to us, to the whole committee. I get them done on the next day because I have to do that for my brain. But I also, can see where if you're not able to see them until a month later, or maybe if we miss a meeting 2 months later, it's very hard to remember if you really need to make an adjustment. So I did ask Brian that, so he's going to try to get them out more quickly.
That's it, thanks.
Awesome. And the one thing I think I could add, I think I heard from Brian that at least for the stuff that was backlogged to be uploaded, he had said in an email maybe probably not quite a week ago that he had reached out to whoever's job it was to do the upload, and hopefully that should be done by now. So hopefully at least with the backlog stuff, it's there. And yeah, hopefully going forward, the system will just get better. So it's good. Great. Okay. Well, that brings us to the last item, which is adjournment. So I suppose we will need a motion for that and a second for that.
Second.
All right. Yep. All in favor?
Aye.
Awesome. Yes. Very good. Yeah. We're at least on my clock, 9:49. But thank you all. It's been good.
Who seconded that for us? Peter?